The moment Mark stepped inside Greystone Asylum, the air turned heavy, thick with something unseen. The building exhaled decades of sorrow, and the silence felt alive, pressing against his skin. He wasn't alone, 3 friends had come with him, eager to explore the abandoned halls. At first, it was nothing but decay, peeling walls, rusted bed frames, shattered windows, whispering with the wind. Then, the whispers started. Soft at first, distant, but undeniably human. Mark turned sharply, flashlight flickering, but the hallway was empty. They pressed deeper into the asylum. Doors creaked open on their own. A shadow moved across the corridor, too fast, too fluid to be human. The group laughed it off, masking unease with nervous jokes. But as night settled, the temperature dropped unnaturally, their breath visible in the stagnant air. Then came the wail. Long, hollow, filled with anguish. Mark's camera, set up in an old treatment ward, caught something he'd never be able to explain. A figure, tall, thin, its face an empty void, standing just beyond the reach of the light. It didn't move. It simply watched. They ran. They didn't look back. Later, Mark found old records. Patients who had screamed for mercy. Patients who were never let out. And one, in particular, a man who had clawed his own eyes out, saying he didn't want to see them anymore. Some say he's still there. And if you listen closely, you might just hear his whispers, begging for someone to finally see him. The Johnson family never believed in ghosts. Not until the night the house whispered back. The first time it happened, Mrs. Johnson was alone in the kitchen. A soft murmur brushed past her ear, a voice so faint she barely registered it. "Help me," it said. She froze, turning sharply, but there was no one there. At first, she convinced herself it was the wind. But then it happened again. And again. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, winding through the hallways at night, calling her children's names. Her husband dismissed it, until the storm. Thunder roared outside. Rain pounded against the windows. Then, in the darkness, a voice rose above it all. "Get out." It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The family fled the next day. They didn't stay to ask why. But months later, Mrs. Johnson found something chilling. A newspaper article. A woman named Evelyn had once lived in that house. She had died there, alone, her body undiscovered for weeks. Some say she's still there, whispering, pleading for someone to finally listen. Sarah was exhausted, driving home late at night when she saw him, a man standing at the side of the road, drenched in rain, staring blankly ahead. Something in her gut told her to keep driving. But she stopped. He climbed into the car without a word, his clothes soaked, the scent of wet earth filling the space. She asked where he was headed. He didn't answer. Just stared straight ahead. Minutes passed in. Suffocating silence. Then, at the next stoplight, she turned to ask again. And he was gone. The seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There were no wet footprints. Nothing. Heart pounding, she drove home, trying to convince herself she had imagined it. But later, she learned the truth. A man had died on that very stretch of highway years ago. A man who, on rainy nights, was still searching for a ride home. It was nearly midnight when she heard the knock. A woman, alone at home, glanced through the peephole. 2 children stood outside, pale, unmoving. A boy and a girl, no older than 10. "Can we come in?" the girl asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Something about them was wrong. Their skin looked off. Their clothes, slightly outdated. But it was their eyes. Completely black. No whites. No irises. Just 2 voids, absorbing the light. The woman's stomach twisted. Every instinct screamed at her to shut the door. Please, the boy whispered. We need help. She slammed the door and locked it. The knocking continued for hours. But when the sun rose, they were gone. She later discovered she wasn't the only one. Across the country, others had seen them. Others had heard the knocks. And those who let them in? They were never seen again. The call started at exactly 2:13 a.m. David answered the first one, groggy. Silence. Then, a whisper. I'm still here. He hung up, dismissing it as a prank. But the next night, the call came again. I see you. His stomach turned. He checked the locks, peered out the window. No one was there. Night after night, the calls continued. The voice grew bolder. You forgot me. You left me behind. David was terrified. Who was this? Then, one night, the voice said something different. Look outside. Against every ounce of reason, he did. A figure stood under the streetlight. Staring. Unmoving. David never answered the phone again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, it still rings. And deep down, he knows, whoever it is, they're still waiting.